Hello everybody, I am Jared Ross, the GeneaVlogger, and welcome back to another video where I review your DNA test and genealogy questions. If you have a question that you would like me to answer in a future video, be sure to go to my subreddit r/GeneaVlogger and post your question there. Let's jump into it. Although all my ancestors were more or less Eastern European, I'm 25% Scandinavian with a lot of Swedish matches. So he says, I'm from Slovakia, so are my parents and both grandmas. Paternal grandfather was also born in Slovakia, but his father was a half Burgenland Croatian, half Austrian, his mom a Hungarian Romani mother, and an unknown father. My maternal grandfather is from Moravian part of Silesia. All of his ancestors spent centuries in this area, moving only between neighboring villages. The only exception is his grandma. We know nothing certain about her origin. She moved to Moravia after World War I and had no documents with her. She registered as a Polish-Russian immigrant who was born and raised in Poland, however was a native Russian speaker. She considered herself Russian though and was very vocal about it. So imagine our surprise when we all took DNA tests and found out that we have no Russian or Eastern Slavic DNA. Like at all, not even my grandfather. Here are a few other strange things. Me, my mom, my sister, my grandfather all have significant percentage of Scandinavian without any Scandinavian ancestor. We all have plus 20% and a lot of matches from Sweden. The closest two of them are second cousins to my grandfather. We all also have quite high Baltic ancestry. As far as I know, we have no ancestors from Spain, yet somehow me, my mom, and my sister, we all have Spanish DNA mixture. My grandfather does not have it, so it must be from grandma's side. However, I traced her tree to the 1600s, and all her known ancestors were Slovaks. As my dad's grandma was a Romani with an unknown father, we were expecting anything from this side. Surprisingly, it was my mom's side that came out as puzzling and mysterious. From my dad's side, the only unclear thing is that he is 2% Ashkenazi Jewish, my sister is 2% Middle Eastern, and I have some traces of Druze. Here we have the results at the top. I'm not sure who this is. I assume it's from the OP, but I'm confused because from what he said, it looks like this is not the same. We have Eastern European, West Slavic, 57%, Western Europe, Scandinavian, 25%, Southern Europe, Greece, Balkan, 7%, Basque, 5%, we have about less than 2% Southern India, and then less than 1% Druze. Looking at the results down here, which are my heritage, we have 38.8% Balkan, 28.7% Eastern Europe, 17.3% Scandinavian, 12.4% Baltic, 1.9% Iberian, and 0.9% South Asian. So I'm assuming this is the poster again, and we get a whole lot of genetic groups at the high confidence level, and all the groups seem to match up with what's being said. So I think what's happening is the OP is focused a little too specifically on countries and not thinking more historically population groups. OP had mentioned that the maternal grandfather's grandmother was supposed to be Russian, so that would be a second great-grandparent. So we really wouldn't be expecting that much for OP anyway, but it would probably be maybe like 6-point-something% or, you know, give or take. But we also have to historically think of what Russia means, because the Russian Empire has covered all sorts of areas that are now completely other countries. And so even though you might expect some sort of specifically Russian, it makes a lot of sense to me that you wouldn't get that. So all of the Slavic that you have, that West Slavic, the Baltic even, it all makes sense. And then to go through the other three things, the Scandinavian, if you're getting close matches and the closest is a second cousin to the grandfather, well, it's obvious it's going to be through your grandfather's side. But then with a second cousin being the closest Scandinavian, at least in terms of what's estimated, you need to make sure you check what are the other estimates, because I'm sure it's not second cousin specifically, it's just about a second cousin. But even if it is a second cousin, well, a second cousin shares great-grandparents. That means that that second cousin match would be sharing great-grandparents to your grandfather. So you would need to be looking at your grandfather's great-grandparents. And being that your grandfather's mother had an unknown father, well, could very well be through that line, and it would certainly make sense with the timing of it. So the next thing to do from here would be to take all of those matches, See if you can figure out how they're related to each other. Are they all coming from the same family? And if so, then you're going to be able to hone in on what family you're most likely connected to. And building out that tree, maybe you'll be able to find some family member who went to where your family is. And maybe you can even find some sort of record with a family member from that Swedish family and your family. We also have quite high Baltic ancestry. I mean, Baltic, you're talking about Eastern Europe, and with all of what you've mentioned with the Russia and Slovakia and all of that, and the Hungary. I mean, we're talking about places where the borders have changed non-stop for hundreds of years, and population groups have flowed back and forth and all throughout. So not surprising to have Baltic readings coming up with that type of ancestry. And as for the Iberian, I think one question would also be, what site is it coming up on? I see for you, it's coming up on MyHeritage. So is that the same thing with your sister? Is it coming up for her on MyHeritage and not on other sites? Because it could just have to do with how they're reading things, and for whatever reason, MyHeritage is reading something as Spanish. But then again, maybe you do have some sort of Spanish ancestry and MyHeritage is the only one to pick it up. My DNA results from 23andMe, pretty much all European with the quarter Ashkenazi Jewish. Doesn't look like there's any specific question, just kind of a review of it. And Northwestern European, 59.2%. That's broken into Scandinavian at 28.4%, French and German at 21.9%, British and Irish at 1.4%, broadly Northwestern European at 7.5%. Then we have Eastern European at 18.4%. And Ashkenazi Jewish at 22%. So nothing crazy to really break down here. I mean, just a review of it, knowing nothing about you, obviously. It seems like you probably have one parent that's pretty much fully European in a sense, and then the other parent where they're half Eastern European mostly and half Jewish. So basically one grandparent that's fully Jewish, another grandparent that's mostly Eastern European, although it seems like you're getting Northwestern European from both parents because it's over 50%, so you'd have to. So if I were to make a guess as to your 8 great-grandparents, what that breakdown would be, my guess would be that you probably have 2 great-grandparents who are Scandinavian, so that means that you have a grandparent who is fully Scandinavian, seemingly from Denmark based on the community they're guessing, capital region of Denmark, and then 2 great-grandparents who have some sort of French-German ancestry around those areas. So one grandparent from that sort of northwestern area, but I do see they have Baden-Württemberg for Germany and then South Holland for the Netherlands. So I'm guessing that that side that this Northwestern European's coming from, probably that Scandinavian, that other grandparent is probably like half German, half Dutch, or something like that. With the South Holland Netherlands reading, I'm guessing it's really likely you do have that connection to South Holland, and it's probably pretty likely you do have that German connection too. Not so sure about the British and Irish connection. It is a small percentage, and there are a lot of regions they're putting in there, but we're also talking about a lot of really common regions that a lot of people will have cousins who are connected to through all sorts of lines, and not necessarily that person specifically. And then for the other side of your family, I'm guessing that you have one great-grandparent who is some sort of Northwestern European, another great-grandparent who is Eastern European, it looks like probably Polish more than likely. It seems to be pointing specifically to Poland, but I'm not sure how strong that is. And then 2 other great-grandparents or one grandparent who is fully Ashkenazi Jewish. But of course, knowing how these admixtures are just estimates, I could be pretty far off on a good amount of this, most especially in trying to read that Northwestern Europe. But I'm fairly certain you probably have one grandparent who was Jewish. You probably do have one grandparent who is mostly Eastern European, but they might have been half Eastern European, half Northwestern European something. Question here, my most distant ancestor that I have a picture of, my 5th great-grandmother, Sarah Thompson Brown, born 1787. I find it crazy how I can go back so far in some branches, but others I don't even know what my great-grandparents look like. What is the most distant ancestor that you have a picture of? Now that is really cool to have a picture of a 5th great-grandmother, somebody born in the 1700s. I mean, it's really crazy to just think, you know, what did she see? Now, I hope I'm not being disrespectful here, but I will say, are you related to Creed Bratton through this ancestor? Because the more I look at this photo, I kind of realize she looks a lot like Creed Bratton from The Office. Like, I'm not crazy. Does anybody else see that? Like, there is definitely some sort of a resemblance there. Maybe you are related to Creed Bratton. But to answer your question, this is the picture of the oldest ancestor that I have. This is my third great-grandfather, Raphael Nunes Vaz, who was born in 1837 in Amsterdam. There are a lot of people who posted photos, so let's take a look through. So Karen Anna Christopher's daughter, Solom, born 1819 in Riesa, Norway, died 1896, third great-grandmother. It really is crazy to wonder, you know, what would they think? You know, especially thinking like hundreds of years later, like what people are going to see what photos of us, like what's going to survive. Obviously, a lot more I think will survive of our, you know, photos and stuff in 100 years than from 100 years ago or 200 years ago, but it's still crazy. So not a photo, but I found this painting that has both my father's third great grandfather and my mother's grandfather's uncle. Interesting. They're not related at all. Okay, so I just love the coincidence of having a relative from both my father and my mother meeting almost 200 years ago and taking the time to be drawn together. That is really cool. That is really cool. So here we have tag along community. We see I'm A, paternal half sister is M. Her mother is half Japanese. I have 0% Asian, no Asian in my family tree either. So let's see, ethnicity estimates, A and M, yep, Scotland, England, Northwestern, Sweden, Denmark, Ireland, Norway, Wales, Japan, Southern Japanese Islands, Korea, France. Ancestry says these are our shared communities. The G, A, and FL checks out. Not sure what's going on with the algorithm. Yeah, it's giving you Japan. My DNA communities, the only state I don't have known ancestry from is Illinois. Also, there's Japan just hanging out. So what I think is happening here is a glitch in the system, basically how they read it. So the way that the communities are come up with is they look at your matches, they look at the match's ancestral locations. So basically what locations are they putting, and then basing that for you. For some reason, even though you get no Asian percentages or anything like that, I'm guessing because your half-sister is Asian, her mom is Japanese, and thus has a lot of Japanese areas listed in her ancestry, they're picking up on that and thus saying, oh, well, you seem to have this community connection because you have such a close match that's listing that. So I'm guessing that's why that error is coming through, although I would hope that there would be things in place to possibly curb that, especially tying communities specifically to getting specific readings. So basically, I would have hoped that it would have picked up that you had 0% Asian or Japanese or anything like that. Then again, they might also limit themselves on how they correlate the percentages to the ancestral locations, because there are population groups which have migrated to places and stayed within their own communities, even though they're living in a completely different area. So this is probably just something slipping through the cracks of Ancestry trying to make some sort of balanced system in their conclusions. Am I related to Steven Spielberg's father? On Family Tree DNA, both me and my father match Steven Spielberg's father, Arnold Spielberg. The longest segment that I match Arnold Spielberg on is 16.76 centimorgans long. My father also matches Arnold Spielberg on the same exact segment, only this segment is 19.71 centimorgans long. According to Family Tree DNA, I also share a total of 36 centimorgans of DNA with Arnold Spielberg, and my father shares a total of 40 centimorgans of DNA with Arnold. All three of us, me, my father, and Arnold Spielberg, are 100% Ashkenazi Jewish. I've attached a couple of screenshots of some information on the details of our DNA matches with Arnold Spielberg. Do me and my father match Steven Spielberg's dad on this segment because we are truly related to him, or do we only match him because we are Ashkenazi Jewish just like Steven's father? So here we have Robert Nell, who must be the father because this one has the 19.71 centimorgan segment. And we see the other three segments are 6.68, 6.61, and 6.71, which are right at the threshold of a typical centimorgan threshold, which is usually 7 centimorgans. But we are dealing with Jewish endogamy, so then you usually want to be a little bit tighter with it and possibly have higher amounts. But that 19.71 segment is a really good segment. Now we see chromosome 2, 2, chromosome 3, chromosome 4. But now we're going to look at what you inherited, because if you're inheriting DNA on different chromosomes, then that means that you're also related to Arnold Spielberg through your mom's side. And that's the issue with Jewish endogamy, is you end up being related through almost every side of your family. Even though your dad's related to him, if you got your grandparents to test, you may find that both of them are also related to him. So now we pull up yours and we see chromosome 1, chromosome 4, chromosome 10. So that chromosome 4 is the only correlation that you and your dad are sharing with Arnold Spielberg. So that means that whatever you're sharing with Arnold Spielberg on chromosome 1 and chromosome 10 must be coming from your mom's side, or it's just an issue in reading the DNA. What's known as identical by state. Basically, it's just identical only because of the state of the DNA. Now, does this mean that you are related to Arnold Spielberg? Most likely, but with a lot of caveats. Number one, I don't know if this is truly the Arnold Spielberg that's the father of Steven Spielberg. I would assume there's multiple people with the name. So that's the first hurdle you need to get over, is confirming that this is actually Steven Spielberg's father. But then the second caveat is yes, you are related to him because you are sharing DNA, but that relation is probably super, super, super distant, although it's multiple different ways. So each of these little segments of DNA that you're getting, unless they're those misreads, which are the identical by state, and that's as opposed to identical by descent, which is that the DNA is identical between you and your match because you descend from the same ancestor. So this one segment that you have on chromosome 4, it's probably coming from some ancestor that you share with Arnold Spielberg, but that ancestor could have lived back in the 1800s, the 1700s, or possibly even further, because some segments can go for many generations unchanged because recombination is very random. So while it's likely that you are related to this Arnold Spielberg, it's probably extremely distant and probably way further than you could prove using the paper trail. Now, even though I deal with the same issues of Jewish endogamy, I've been able to use all sorts of DNA matches to help expand my family tree on lines that I thought I never could. So if you'd like to learn more about that, be sure to check out this video right here. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. That really does help me out. Also, click right here if you'd like to subscribe. It's completely free to do so. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GeneaVlogger. I'm the GeneaVlogger. See you in my next video.